EdTech Mondays Uganda is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with the Innovation Village. Welcome to EdTech Mondays Uganda March edition. Now, EdTech Mondays is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with the Innovation Village. Now, looking at the EdTech sector on the African continent, it is on a rapid growth trajectory, fueled by technological advancements and a surging demand for innovative learning solutions. In Uganda, the intersection of policy perspectives and the drive to empower innovation in education technology, EdTech signals a transformative era. As the nation sets its sights on fostering a dynamic learning landscape, the nexus of policy initiatives is now critical. So welcome to EdTech Mondays March edition. I am your host, Sandra Kahomza Twinodio, and joining us is a great panel of speakers. On my immediate left is Mr. Brighton Barar, who boasts of 20 years experience working as a policy analyst in various roles, like Assistant Commissioner for Policy Analysis at the Ministry of Education and Sports, and a Principal Policy Analyst at the Office of the Prime Minister. He is currently the Commissioner, Education Policy and Research at the Ministry of Education and Sports. We are glad to have you on the panel today.
Good afternoon, viewers.
Very excited to have you on the panel to give us a government perspective in regards to what is happening in EdTech in the country. And right in the middle is Paula Mugisa. Is that right?
Yes.
I hope I said it right.
That's right.
Is the EdTech founder of African Scaling Marketplace, and she has a 4-part system to host business content for primarily African entrepreneurs and their teams. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And finally joining us is Collins Otim, that is the Country Director of VLand Technologies, that is dedicated to providing state-of-the-art education content delivery solutions. Now, his passion lies in leveraging technology to address educational challenges. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Good afternoon, viewers. I'm so glad to be here.
Great. And Collins,
Yeah,
we want to stay with you at this very point because we want you to give us a personal story. You started VLand. What is VLand trying to address?
So VLand started off a year ago in Uganda. So it is basically an EdTech startup that is built for corporate organizations and also learning institutions within Uganda. We have people nowadays who do long distance learning. So we are trying to remove that kind of perspective that somebody has to be in class all the time in order to learn something. Mm-hmm. So we are trying to also make sure that we promote online studies within Uganda.
Mm-hmm. Now, over to you, Paula. Just to get your perspective, you've worked with different EdTech entrepreneurs. What has been your experience? What is the biggest challenge if you're to look at the numerous businesses that you've worked with?
Oh, wow. Thank you, Sandra. There are numerous challenges. One of them is how can we create informal paths to learning? Yeah, across the different tiers for primary school, secondary school, vocational, and higher up. How can we create informal paths of learning that impart relevant marketplace skills for the 21st century to Ugandans, to Africans who are used to our traditional way? You know, you go to school, like Otim is saying, you know, you write down things. I mean, that formal way works. But we also know in Uganda and Africa, there are so many people outside of that framework for many different reasons. And so I know our EdTech at TESA and many others are trying to figure out informal learning paths that are still relevant, that are still useful to impart skills. And now when you go to the tech side, that presents another challenge. So there's the education side, getting that concrete, so good teachers, quality education. And now the tech side has a lot to do with development, developing of development of platforms, internet infrastructure. Do we have enough software developers, to help us put this content, these ideas, these programs onto stable platforms that can be disseminated nationally? So I would say modifying content, delivering it to Ugandans in a way that is successful, usable, practical, and then also developing the technological platforms that will host this education. Those would be the main challenges, I think.
Great. Now, Mr. Brighton Barar, when you listen to these individual perspectives, what are your thoughts generally on the EdTech sector in the country? I would quickly love to ask if the government is clearly prioritizing EdTech, but just to hear from your perspective, from your experience, what are the current challenges that you're seeing in the adoption of EdTech in education in Uganda?
Thank you very much, Sandra. Since you are saying government, we are talking about the entire Uganda.
Yes.
And we know technology is an enabler, and it's an important tool that can aid the learning and the teaching process. But before we go for it, and I think you have heard in your remarks saying we are not as fast as the innovators. We are slow simply because we have to think for everybody. We have to create an environment where this technology can be applied, but also we have to think about sustainability. That this technology, the way it is changing, it comes with a cost. Those changes come with a cost. And the government has predictable unknown sources of income. So we welcome the innovations, but we are mindful that we don't create inequity in access to technology, in the use of technology, in the maintenance of technology to facilitate learning. And we don't want to set ourselves to fail. So I think the genuine discussion we would have with our partners in the private sector is first see readiness for this EdTech uptake, because if we say teachers are using technology, we must cater for teachers at all levels, because we have teachers at primary, secondary, tertiary, and higher education institutions. And there is the initial capital, which is significant, but there is also the recurrent capital, which must keep these technologies up to date and all the time. Yeah. But the second point, which we are talking about, is there must be systemic, because if we use technology for teaching and maybe the learners are using it for learning, is it along the entire value chain?
But where is the starting point for the government, for example? Because yes, we could have different processes that we have to follow, but where is the starting point? Now that we do recognize that technology is here, where is our starting point?
Our starting point is with the teachers, because the entry point in education must be the people who facilitate the learning process. Yes. And because we have very many teachers who have not been, who are also part of the previous reality where technology was like a luxury or was unknown to us. So we have to think about skilling and making our teachers, first of all, literate with the technology, but also adaptable and to accept. Because most of these decisions that facilitate learning are made by the teachers, lecturers, who are now, must be ahead for us now as government to join.
But also, do we have infrastructure in place to ensure that it sort of thrives in a way?
The answer is both yes and no. We have infrastructure, but not adequate infrastructure.
Let us now get your personal story once again, Collins. In terms of digital infrastructure, how has your experience been?
Looking at this kind of technology, it has not been easy to penetrate into the Ugandan market. As the Honorable Minister said, there are a lot of challenges looking at infrastructure. So somebody in Moroto will not be able to use our system, maybe because the internet accessibility is too, somebody has one bar, he can't even open a web page.
Paula, what are your thoughts on that? In terms of, we are looking at digital infrastructure, but where is our starting point if we want to see, the adoption of EdTech in education?
Yeah, It's a hard question, to be fair, because it has so many components. On the education side, I would agree with Mr. Brighton, the Commissioner Honorable, about starting with the teachers. But my view about the teachers is, again, there is a traditional formal system that we have in Uganda, that most other African countries have, for equipping teachers, licensing teachers, and putting them into schools. But there is a massive, massive teacher deficit. There is inadequate teacher training and a lack of quality teachers, like the Commissioner was saying, to really uphold our entire learning system. And so my view, and this is a theory that we have at TESA that's worth sharing, how can we get more quality teachers to participate? I think we need to use unconventional approaches. I think you could be a teacher, Sandra. I think this show, yes,
in
this
itself,
show is educational. Yes, I think that's what MasterCard is trying to do with EdTech Mondays. What I'm trying to say is we have skilled professionals, we have business people, we have a whole media team behind us who have experiences and skills that they can impart in a non-traditional way. I think we need to start with teachers, but I think we need to start with an unconventional approach to having more teachers, more quality, experienced teachers on the ground who we can then catalyze to teach our youth. And then on the technology side, because it's EdTech, I think when we're talking about infrastructure for the small business, outside of the internet and all of those things, electricity, platforms that Otimanized businesses stand on, we still have a big problem when it comes to software development for EdTech.
Would you say that if, for example, as a country, we had an EdTech policy framework in place already, would it be one way of solving the challenges that you point out now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think government stands in a unique position to make education, but EdTech specifically, attractive. Usually I know in the private sector we look up to government for data, for information, for statistics, right? Suppose the education ministry came out and said our priority for the next 5 years is to solve the issue of teachers, teacher training, teacher capacity, teacher equipping, getting unconventional teachers across industries, mathematics, and so on and so forth. And so we want you, the private sector, to create, to innovate in this space, right? Yes. This is what we're expecting, this is what we want teachers to do, and then they provide oversight to that process. A policy would make EdTech attractive. It would grab our attention and force us to think how we can start to innovate within government guidelines, how we can start to innovate to solve some of these challenges using
what, Paula, luckily we do have someone that we can, send the questions to, and we want to come back to you, Mr. Brighton. Now, when you look at their thoughts, for example, do you think the government is facing challenges in adopting a policy framework for EdTech? Could there be something that us on the outside are not seeing?
I think, thank you very much, Sandra. The other problem is the mindset.
Yes.
And we can talk about the technology, we can talk about the policy.
We can talk about the infrastructure.
The infrastructure. But many people, when they appreciate, they are even willing to invest private capital to make it move very fast, to adopt it. Yes. But also mindset is the one that will unlock the barriers. Where people say, we don't want our children with phones, we don't want these things. All those are mindset. And because now there is no evidence that this thing works, people don't want to lose what they know works and go for what can be missing. So there is some kind of mistrust, but also the mindset. And the parents are not yet, who are the ones who are giving us the runners, who are the ones who are sponsoring them, who have some money in the gap that the government now that may not have the money and the infrastructure. These parents, if they appreciated, they would stand in the gap. I remember in Makerere they had the policy of buy your laptop, and you would buy a laptop and use it. But now you discover there are people who say we can't afford it. There are people who say I studied without a laptop, which is about mindset. They are saying then if you want a laptop you will not study. So all those barriers can be discussed through a policy framework, And then when we have agreed on the direction we are taking, then we can have safeguards in the law to ensure those people who are coming, the bad apple, people who want to come to provide a solution but use it as a trap to exploit the government right, left, center. It's like you start hating technology by simply dealing with this one bad guy who makes you run all over and you even want to go to court.
Well, I think let us get Colin's perspective. You know, you've given the government side of the story, but Collins, what is your side of the story? In what ways do you think the local private EdTech startups are failing the government, for example, in your opinion?
Well, thank you so much, Sarah.
Or are they even failing the government? Or would you rather say, no, we are not failing the government at all in terms of that aspect of trust?
Thank you so much for that question. So I would say we are not failing the government in any way. So we should actually be embracing this kind of technology with government. The policies have to come and favor the EdTech startups that are already participating in the industry. For example, if you look at the accreditation of the EdTechs, so we don't have a body which can say now this EdTech is here and I think it is very fine for it to operate in the market. So that is something that we don't have for now.
Let us now speak to Mr. Brighton and directly address the issue of the policy frameworks. At the moment, what is happening?
Thank you very much, Sandra. I also wanted to talk about standards. You see, whereas it is very easy for a private developer to go into the technology space and develop an issue, government worldwide have standards, and those standards are not easy standards. Why? Because they must balance the interest of protecting people who are likely to be harmed, but also people who are coming into this space. So those standards, for example, if we say we want to adopt this technology, we know you are a startup, you have no capacity to supply, and you are waiting for, first of all, government to give you a contract, which you can use to get money. And the government, first of all, they ask you, how do you spend government money on something that is not existing? So it is not that we don't like the local startups. It is that sometimes they also come in a very, very shabby manner, that sometimes you don't want to risk to deal with them. But if they came to say, we want to partner with you and grow, that would be solved now. In terms of the policy space, having learned lessons from the COVID lockdown, we are now persuaded that we need to open some and remove some of the structural barriers that are a hindrance to the technology uptake. And we are reviewing most of our policies, most of our regulations, most of our administrative standards to make sure that it now becomes normal. It now becomes normal that when somebody brings a computer to school or wants to use it to facilitate learning, it is not that he's showing off. Because you will see in some schools, if you come with a laptop, you want to use the PowerPoint, other teachers will be the one to start shooting you down to show that you are trying to be a class apart, or they will even steal it, or they will even destroy it, because of the other mindset and the indiscipline associated with it.
Yeah.
But we are trying to, we even have an innovation fund, and we are putting money, especially at the university level. So that universities that can generate local solutions, we fund them. And when we fund them, we know we have given them money, we test their solutions, and when they are applicable, we adopt them. Because like there is a system we are using in universities, which was developed by the students of Chambogo, out of that initiative. So what we are doing now is to remove all the legal and the policy barriers and create space for technology to take root in education to facilitate both the learning and the teaching process.
And I think we'll be talking briefly about the barriers in a bit, but it's very clear that the government is doing its part and also the private sector is doing its part. But how then do we accelerate this process? This is a conversation that we're still having, and would like you to also be part of this conversation. So you can use our hashtag on our social media platforms, EdTech Mondays, and send in your views in regards to the policy frameworks that we can bring or put in place as Uganda to accelerate the adoption of EdTech in Uganda. We'll take a short break and we'll be back shortly. EdTech Mondays Uganda is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with the Innovation Village. Welcome back. Glad to know you're still watching EdTech Mondays. Now, before we went in for the short break, Mr. Brighton right here said that most of the startups, local startups in Uganda, tend to come forward in a shabby manner. And I want us to start from that specific point. Now that you brought that out, for the startups watching us today, how should they put their business in order?
I think business is an intentional undertaking, but it must also have broader actors, but also interests. While we understand that a startup is a business venture, you should come and present your concept. It is discussed because you are trying to impact society through a sector. Now, if we know your proposal, then we tell you this proposal is not addressing our problems. Can you adjust? So that from the word go, the people who are coming have a full understanding of the problem at hand, and we also support them because they are helping us to get a solution. Yes. That is one. Two, formalize because many people come up with their proposals, have their technology solutions. Now, when they come, they are not coming to nurture their technologies. They are coming for a business. They want a decision. Help me. Why are you promoting the people from China? Where? Instead of saying, I have this solution, can we try it? Can we see how it grows? Can we test it together and see whether it is worth it? So that when we are going to make a decision to go with your solution, we have full confidence it works. It has taken care of the interests of government, but at the same time, it has followed, it has been tested, it has been tried. Now, they want quick solutions, and we are saying, let's wait for now. But secondly, there is a Ministry of Science and Technology. They have an innovation fund where those startups are supposed to be nurtured. And there is funding, there is also capacity to work with you. They can give you the experts to support you and improve your startup idea to make sure that it is nurtured into a project that can now be supported.
Now the other question would be, has the government put these opportunities out there for these startups to adopt them? Because Collins, for example, do you know that it actually exists? You can get this help from the government.
Yeah, I think that kind of infrastructure is available. Yeah, there are very many programs that we see that have come up for funding, basically. But in this case, we're looking at something like transparency within this sector. So you can come out and say now there's this EdTech that we funded, government funded, and it is working so well. So people out there will come and apply for these, startups will come and apply for this kind of fund. And that is something that we need to look at, transparency within the government.
Mr. Brighton, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think government is the most transparent, although we cannot rule out people who are not transparent, and those people are already, they take advantage. Either they conceal information or they carry their private or individual interests ahead of the public interest. They are always there, and usually we cannot rule them out. But in terms of transaction with government, if you make a formal engagement, you say, I want to have a discussion. If you say you want even to come and present to senior management, who will give you the forum or top management, you say, this is my product, I am trying it, I need support, and you make your proposals, we support you and even advise you. So we are very transparent. The only challenge which we think we need to work on is, let's have our interests harmonized. Because for us in government, we don't have business interests, we have public interest, which includes yours, but at the same time we must protect the runners, we must protect the investors, we must protect the government money, and we must follow procedure. Now when you add all those things and you are the one doing them, you don't want to really relax them casually. So if the discussion comes, You can even be given a holiday if you have no money, but you are progressive. You can say, don't pay tax, we will support you. You can even be given some kind of financing. Say, you demonstrate this, we go with you. But those are issues that cannot be resolved here, but which require just a goodwill, a gesture to say, government is acting in good faith, you're acting in good faith. What we need is to think together, to grow together, and walk this journey together.
Now, as we walk the journey together, Paula, give us your remarks in regards to how startups out there can position themselves better to work properly with the government. Because I believe if the startups are doing it right and they approach the government, by now would be having a policy framework. The target is to have a clear policy framework. So how do we work towards that?
Yeah, I think this conversation is very interesting. There's a lot of good insight for startups and for EdTech startups. I know for myself, one of the things that I've understood that I also want to share with those who will watch this show is what Mr. Brighton is recommending, the relational approach to partnerships and partnerships in the long term. So the private sector, as the startups putting forward what we have and keeping it open for government to review it. Yes, yeah, and government protecting our interests, because I think sometimes there is the fear of you're the smaller person being taken advantage of. I'm walking here, or I'm taking a border here to make this presentation, and we're running a startup, so nobody is paying us. So there's that tension. But I think with an open relational approach, I think a lot can happen in terms of the innovations we are able to collaborate with government on, but it can also help government inform maybe some of the policies that they're creating to make innovation and startup and enterprise more amenable for us.
As we come to the very end, Collins, would like to hear your few thoughts on how the future looks like for startups in this country, since you're one yourself. You have one yourself.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So I would say the future looks so bright, since we have Honorable here. And he has given us very good insights on actually how the future looks like in the EdTech world. So this is something that we are going to embrace, and want to urge the startups that are out there, please come and collaborate with the government, although we shall keep waiting for the policies to come along.
As you advocate for them.
Basically. I think that's all I can say.
Over to you, Paula. How does the future look like for EdTech startups in this country?
I think the future for EdTech startups in this country is very promising, particularly those who want to get into that space of workplace learning. Yeah, I think that is a pressing problem. So people who, out of school youth, haven't finished university, I'm finding that in our space to be the most promising sector. And so I'd really like to encourage people who want to offer soft skills, people who want to offer programs for out of school youth, people who are really essentially solving the job problem, right? Because a job problem is an education problem. So I find it particularly promising for those in that group. I think we have a lot of people in the private sector and government willing to impart information now. The more that we continue to consume information online. And then we have a impressionable, hopeful, huge, useful group who just want to move forward. They know where they want to get to, but they don't know how. And so if there are any edtechs, any businesses that want to enter into that space particularly, I would say the future is bright. And so for primary and secondary school also, I'm seeing a lot of schools wanting to embrace technology so that they can catalyze, primary people and secondary people to participate into the workplace over time, like start to equip them really early. I find that promising as well. So I would encourage all Ugandans to start to get into education or skilling or training or master classes, any of those things. I think there's a growing need for them in Uganda.
Well, Mr. Brighton, as we come to the very end, as startups, those for the startups that are watching us today, what are your general last remarks to them? From the government perspective, they are looking forward for a policy that is going to facilitate the process. What are your last remarks to them?
Thank you very much, Sandra. And I think finally, we are looking at one, partnering with the private actors in the space of EdTech, but also they must be willing to be regulated. You see, for government, when everything can't work, government must come in. And the reason they come in is you don't want to be surprised. We want to have a minimum consensus on how the partnership will work. And then you also help us, because there are also some bad guys in that space of yours who come take advantage of government. So government is saying, let's agree on the policy framework. And the policy framework is good because it is directional, it is on what we have agreed. Now we also have another arm of the legal framework that we must also, after we have agreed on this, we will not trust you 100%. We will go back and say, let's put safeguards. If this consensus and the direction doesn't work, do we fold our hands? No. We shall say the law will now come for you. So the solution we are providing as government is we are going to fast track, putting in place the policy framework to make sure we work harmoniously to deepen EdTech in the sector. But we shall also work with you to tell you what are the likely consequences if this harmonious arrangement doesn't work. Sorry. The government cannot be in vain. But otherwise, I want to thank you. We cannot do and deliver education alone. Yes. And we know, you know, everybody knows. So I don't know why we can't come on the round table and say, since we can't do it alone, yes, you also can't do it alone. Yes. Why don't we do it together? Yes. And that way we are all winners.
Indeed, and this is exactly why we're having these conversations. Many thanks for joining us here on EdTech Mondays. And indeed, there is no doubt that empowering the EdTech sector in Uganda requires a multi-faced approach. So the private sector, the government, or both of them need to come together to find the way forward. But we also want to hear from you. So do remember to continue this conversation online, and we'll be right there to see some of the recommendations that you're bringing forward. Thank you once again. I have been your host, Sandra Kahumza Twinobudio.
EdTech Mondays Uganda is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with the Innovation Village.